Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 4th of January 2017. Happy New Year to everybody. This is the first UK column news of the new year. Afraid Brian is not with me today, still under the weather with sort of flu kind of thing. So today I'm glad to say I'm joined by Alex Thomson from Eastern Approaches. Happy New Year to you, Alex. How's things in the Netherlands?
Happy New Year, Mike. It's going pretty well here. We just about survived the annual onslaught of Dutch New Year's Eve, when everyone down to little kids gets whiz bangs and lets them off randomly between 9 p.m. on New Year's Eve, or as soon as it gets dark, and right through to the following morning. My mother came over last year to see us for New Year's Eve, and I think she decided never again. So she was back with at my parents' house this year. It's quite an onslaught for the senses, but other than that, doing pretty well here. Thanks.
Good stuff. Well, let's say Happy New Year, because 2017 is the year of the Navy, and there, as you can see on screen, we have the British Navy, well, of course, no year would be well. Before we get on to the £100 million bung to BAE Systems. Let's just talk about what the government said. They said 2017 is set to be the year of the Royal Navy as it prepares to welcome new ships to the fleet following one of the busiest years since the end of the Cold War. Michael Fallon said, "We're investing billions in growing the Royal Navy for the first time in a generation, with new aircraft carriers, submarines, frigates, patrol vessels, and aircraft all on their way. 2017 is the start of a whole new era of maritime power, projecting Britain's influence globally and delivering security at home." At the peak of activity in 2016, naval service personnel were involved in 22 operations at home and abroad, serving on nearly 30 ships, submarines, support vessels, and fleet air arm squadrons, 8,325 sailors and Royal Marines in all. This pace of operations will continue throughout the festive period and well into 2017. During the first quarter of next year, 1/3 of the Royal Navy's frontline strength will be on global operations. So there you go. I'm sure the Navy personnel are really impressed with the government's pace of development. Alex?
Yes, a chat room comment has said it all. The Royal Navy has cunningly disguised its remaining ships as seawater. That must put us ahead of even the Russian Navy, which has got camouflaged land assault vehicles now.
Well, indeed. Well, look, let's just talk about the BAE Systems bung, because this is a report from the House of Commons. The Royal Navy's new frigates and national shipbuilding strategy, December 2016 update. And they say that in 2009, the government signed a 15-year terms of business agreement with BAE Systems and Babcock. The TOBA guaranteed BAE Systems a minimum level of surface ship build and support activity of £230 million per year. And because basically there was a shortfall in that, the Ministry of Defence has paid an extra £100 million for nothing, really, because otherwise there would have been compensation clauses and so on coming in. So Philip Hammond said, he was then the Defence Secretary, had said last year, we're effectively ordering the patrol vessels to soak up money we would have been paying in any case to have these yards stand idle. So this is an impressive use of taxpayers' money and highlighted by the House of Commons there. Alex, perhaps we have a bit of a history with BAE Systems and unusual deals.
We very much do. I think you're thinking of the Al Yamama deal with Saudi Arabia, which goes back to the Thatcher cabinet. I was at rugby with the daughter, one of them, of Jonathan Aitken, who of course went to prison, not least because of what he'd done in that deal. Now, it goes back even further than that, because BAE, if you've been listening to David Ellis of Strategic Defence Initiatives talking about this, our military correspondent, he mentions that BAE was deliberately put together by the government as a result of the Sands report. That's Sands with a YS at the end. Duncan Sands was the Minister for War, or the Defence, I think they called it by that time, in 1957. And he said that Her Majesty's government, as the monopoly buyer, wanted first the aircraft and then the whole of the tri-service defence engineering to merge into a single monopoly. Well, of course, that has left the situation bloated. David has, in fact, submitted to the House of Commons Defence Committee a written submission for their procurement and acquisition inquiry, which they prolonged the submission date for until just before Christmas. So he sent something in which, according to the normal rules of the Defence Committee, they should have published and put up on their website by now. Certainly by early next week, we'll be asking questions if they haven't put that up on their website. And either way, we will let you know. If necessary, we may have to host the text on the UK column website instead. And he made a big point of this. A case study of how acquisition went wrong was that Vickers produced excellent submarines, and then it was merged into BAE. And by that time, from that time onwards, the MOD started putting fingers in the pie and saying, can we have a bit of a widget there and a wadget there and reduce the budget a bit and make it multi-purpose? And then these superb boats stopped working. And his whole point is, BAE will never get healthy again if it keeps getting bungs and requirements laid on it. You have to stand back and let the private market and the genius inventors actually think things up that work and produce prototypes and give them to the MOD to buy or not to buy.
Well, thanks very much for that, Alex. Now let's move on to Brexit. And of course, the big news today is that Sir Ivan Rogers, the permanent representative to the European Union, has resigned. A government spokesman, according to the government and other news outlets, it was a government spokeswoman, said that Sir Ivan Rogers has resigned a few months early as UK permanent representative to the European Union. Sir Ivan has taken this decision now to enable a successor to be appointed before the UK invokes Article 50 by the end of March. We're grateful for his work and commitment over the last 3 years. And I've used the National front page here from today to illustrate this, not because I particularly think the National's a good newspaper, far from it, but their headline was Brexit Shambles. And I have to say, Alex, this is a case of we told you so. We knew that this was coming. Well, he sent an email to UK civil servants today, and he said that colleagues had to provide British ministers with unvarnished understanding as they go through Brexit negotiations, even where this is uncomfortable. He said, I hope you will continue to challenge the ill-founded arguments that muddle thinking and that you will never be afraid to speak the truth to those in power. He said that the government was guilty of serious multilateral negotiating experience, that they need rapid resolution, that they don't really know what they're doing, and so on. Hilary Benn was quoted in various news sources. I think he was speaking on BBC Radio's Force Today program today. He said it wasn't a good thing. He said that hard work is going to start very soon. And he said having a handover in the middle of that, depending on where exactly he goes, is not ideal. And of course, we would say that this was intentional from the beginning, Alex.
I very much agree with that, and very much of the view that Rogers, like Sir Kim Darroch in Washington, who has been noised about that he might be replaced by Farage, that we don't have a tradition of appointees. We have professional diplomats, not unlike the US, which recently has moved to that model. There's been noises that Darroch might have to move as well, and there's people crowing now that they've got Rogers' scalp. People leaking to Guido Fawkes that he got it in the neck because of these insufferable messages that he sent directly to the Prime Minister when that was still Cameron, saying the party hacks who want a quick Brexit don't know what they're banging on about, and this is going to be very complicated. I'm afraid I'm of the view that Rogers was telling the truth. Now, whether I'm of his political sympathies or not is a different matter, and there is a lot of deliberate wishful thinking. By the way, that's one of the English phrases that travels well. Most continental languages use the English term wishful thinking in their own languages because it's so characteristic of what we do, muddled and wishful all the time. So I think there's been a deliberate trajectory towards that, actually, and Rogers just couldn't take it anymore.
The arguments within the establishment are building. Jacob Rees-Mogg saying we've got to find somebody who's very pro-Brexit to replace and other people beggared, whose belief is beggared, shall we say, and they're complaining that we've got rid of the 3 best EU qualified negotiators. But this we believe was intentional from the beginning. That this whole thing was never intended, or at least it was set up to fail. Of course, one of the impacts of that potentially is unrest, civil unrest, because obviously people are going to be somewhat disappointed if Brexit doesn't happen. Sky News actually suggesting that may exactly be the case. They were interviewing somebody about this, what would happen if Brexit didn't happen. And the response that they got was from this lady, well, oh, there would be mass riots, there'll be hysteria, and there could even be a civil war, to be fair with you. The country has used its voice, and she went on to say if the government doesn't meet the country's demands, that there could be serious repercussions. What's Sky News doing, pushing out this type of thing?
Well, I see Sky News as halfway towards what are now called the alt-right, as are Fox News in America. And of course, the British and American establishments, when they came on the scene, were very snooty and looked down their noses and said, right-wing populism. And they've stopped saying that now that real right-wing populists, the alt-right, have appeared. Sky and Fox are left behind, and I'm sorry to be cynical, but they're just generating clickable, shareable stuff to keep up there, with the newly burgeoning competition. And the way to do that is always to predict doom, gloom, and race riots, isn't it? Just to answer a question in the chat room as well, Martin Edwards asked, why do we need a permanent representative to the EU once we've left? I'm afraid such is the power of the EU as one of the select few international organizations in the world that has that much clout, that almost every sovereign nation sends a diplomat to be permanent representative to the EU. Even distant countries, far into Eastern Europe and Africa, have such a thing. So we're going to be saddled with that role as long as the EU exists.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Alex. Now, let's look at some of the material that you wanted to cover here, and we'll start off with Yves Chandelon. Tell me about him. He was the NATO Auditor General, I believe.
He was, and he lived and worked in this tri-border area between France, Belgium, and Luxembourg. He lived in Lens, near the Belgian border, which is in France. He was, I think, Belgian. He worked in NATO's, not in the headquarters in Brussels, but in the Luxembourg town of Capellen. And he was found dead in the Ardennes in southern Belgium at the end of last year. Lots of stuff going on here, but in brief, he was happy. He had 3 registered service weapons, and he was shot with a 4th pistol that was none of these 3. Some early reports said that the pistol was found in his glove box, which is rather difficult to do to put it neatly back if you've suicided yourself. Later reports said that it had been found in his right hand. A couple of problems with that. 1, the family said he was left-handed and it was put in his right hand. 2, he had apparently shot himself right at point-blank range, right against the temple, which, by the way, suicides don't often do. It's one of these sad facts as a former intelligence officer. People generally go for that or a distance away from the head. But he was right up against the temple, apparently. And the weapon miraculously did not recoil out of his hand and go shooting yards away, as it usually does, but it actually fell dead in his hand, we're told. Then we're told, and this seems to have come from Sibel Edmonds' man on the ground in Belgium, that before his death, he had told his son, I'm in a lot of trouble, I'm being followed, I have enemies. Here is a dodgy dossier which you must file with the authorities if anything happens to me. So he's now endangered his son's life. He seems to have been himself one of these who knew for years what NATO was doing. But according to, we're getting onto the foreign coverage now anyway, but it seems that he knew something was afoot and wanted to protect himself.
So this is Turkish coverage. What has the Turkish news got to say about this?
This is Vatan, which means fatherland, and it's one of these jingoistic news outlets in Turkey that's close to Erdogan. And it says that an EU member state, which is a NATO state as well, that's all it says about the country responsible. The intelligence service of that country had him done professionally because he had uncovered that that country, and by extension NATO, was using a proliferation of private companies to pursue its terrorism aims as a kind of cutout, which is exactly what NATO's done, of course, for decades with Gladio anyway. But even if it was something that shocked even an insider whose start was in dodgy banking, compromised Franco-Belgian banking even before he was brought into NATO, even he was shocked by it, it must have been pretty something.
Lemu's suggesting that he was leading a double life.
Yes, although the detail of that is a bit scant, but it's very interesting that he is described as having a double life. They don't mean sexual or anything like that. They just mean that he seemed to be happy at work, but was doing some dodgy stuff. Other Turkish stuff just to reel through here. Yeni Shafak says that Chandelon was the victim of a professional hit. Aksham says that that the CIA was involved in his death. And by the way, Turkish papers don't speculate much. They use sources from MIT, which is the Turkish hand-in-glove operation with CIA. So they often know what they're talking about. Takvim, which is close to Erdogan, says that he started off idealist, but he found stuff that he couldn't get out of his system except by telling people. And then even the opposition paper, Sözcü, says that he had been found in a Russian car once he had been hit, although that was quickly taken down. It did the rounds of the Turkish opposition or anti-Erdogan media online. So a very complicated situation. And of course, as we're coming on to, this was the third of what looked like 3 professional hits in quick succession.
Right, well, we will come on to that in a second, but let's first deal with Putin. And this article here saying Putin says Russia will not expel US diplomats. And really the point you wanted to make here, I think, was that Russia is not responding to the normal tit-for-tat provocations that have been going on. And in fact, we will come on to the assassination of their ambassador in a minute, but even to that, they're not taking the bait, as it were.
Well, it's astonishing, Mike. I remember you and I discussed the assassination of Mr. Karlov when it had just happened in Ankara, and we were discussing it, as were others, as a kind of Franz Ferdinand moment, the eve of the First World War. But there's been a very cool and calm response so far. And it's the centenary year now we're just entering of the Russian Revolution. So we've had 100 years of East-West ideological tension. And in all of that 100 years, the standard procedure has been that if either America or Russia, or it was USSR at times, but if either of those countries expelled X number of diplomats for espionage, which is what Obama did, by the way, to provoke this, then X number of diplomats of the same or similar rank would be expelled within 48 hours by the other country. That was a standard tit for tat. And this is the first time, to my knowledge, in 100 years that the Russians have de-escalated and not played that game. Instead, Putin played a blinder and invited the children of US diplomats accredited in Russia to come to the Kremlin's Christmas party.
Right. Well, that says a lot about the man, I think. But tell us about this Daily News article here. Assassination of Russian ambassador Karlov was not terrorism, but retribution for Vladimir Putin's war crimes.
Well, it's just a stunning article, really.
This has got to be classed as fake news.
I think it's there to provoke a reaction. I don't think that the man even believes it seriously. He's a typical New York liberal in the modern sense of the word liberal, of course, but he got some pretty stunning reaction to this piece. If I'm looking at at the end of his piece, the journalist, I'm not even going to say who he is, it's not really important, but at the end he says, "Will history vindicate Karlov's assassin, Mevlut Mert Altıntaş?" This is the chap who stood behind the Russian ambassador in Ankara in the art gallery and shot him in cold blood. Will history vindicate him, says the New York Daily News writer. That's for history to judge. But it has vindicated Greenspan. By the way, this was a chap who assassinated a Nazi diplomat in Paris in 1938. That's your equivalence for you. And indeed, history has vindicated others who have fought against aggression and fought for freedom. So Mr. Altıntaş there in his John Travolta act, shooting the Russian ambassador cowardly from behind and quite potentially killing others with the ricochet if he hadn't watched out, that was an act of fighting for freedom and fighting against aggression, according to the New York Daily News. And we are the fake news providers, are we, in the independent media?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. And we have another assassination here.
Yes, just to complete the triad, this is Pyotr Polshikov, who was not a junior diplomat by any means. He was senior counsellor to the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs Latin America department, which is actually a very important department in the Russian MFA. Somehow, the assassin managed to get past all of the security, which is quite good for senior diplomats in Moscow, and shot him. And according to, I think it was his widow, the murder weapon was found under the kitchen sink. Now, what kind of signal is that? You'd expect a professional hit usually to take the murder weapon away with them. And the bullet casings were deliberately strewn around different rooms. So it looks again like a means of spreading fear among Russian diplomats. I can't think that this was personally targeted.
Okay, well, look, let's just have a look at Eastern Europe now. And I wanted to start off with this one from foreignpolicy.com. Poland was never as democratic as it looks. And they begin by saying the EU's membership conditions for Poland only dressed up illiberal societies in Democrats' clothing. Now we're seeing the fallout. Once fated for having bucked both the populist trend and the global recession, Poland is facing international condemnation. Recent moves by the Law Justice government have come straight out of the playbook shared by the likes of Hungarian strongman Viktor Orban. It's moved quickly to neuter the Constitutional Court, to take control of the state media, to defund unfriendly NGOs or regulate them into irrelevance, to put its own people in charge of public institutions, and has given every sign of being prepared to ride out waves of protest and ignore international criticism. To be clear, Poland is not yet Hungary, the EU's other major backsliding headache. Law and Justice Party in Poland has only a small parliamentary majority, not the supermajority needed for a Hungarian-style constitutional rewrite. Protesters have been more assertive and quicker to take to the streets. Nor does Poland have a powerful far-right party like Hungary's Jobbik waiting in the wings to claim the role of real opposition if the ruling party falters. And they say, but the spread at which Poland and Hungary's apparently successful democracies have unraveled points toward a problem that has tended to be overlooked amid the latest political developments. Contrary to appearances, liberal democracy was never solidly rooted in Eastern Europe. Just before I ask for comment, I'm going to make a couple of other points here, Alex, because, of course, we need to keep in mind that Poland remains vehemently anti-Russian, and of course Kaczynski there, who's in the photograph, still blames Russia for the death of his brother in the air crash on the way to Smolensk. But some other interesting developments, Alex, in Poland, for example, they've recently blocked any further foreign purchase of land in Poland, and in fact, most land purchases now in Poland, significant land purchases, are being bought up by the church. And one of the things that the foreign policy article doesn't mention is the influence of the Roman Catholic Church on the Law and Justice Party in Poland, which is getting to really pretty extreme levels, as far as I can see. And I wonder if you've got any thoughts on that.
I would summarize all of that, Mike, which is excellent and well observed, by saying that Poland is Eastern Europe's Ireland. Right, so it's got the priestcraft. When it's left to its own devices, it degenerates into a kind of model where the priestcraft control the country, and there's horrible abuses under that, and then they swing back into a kind of secularism, which Poland last had under Alexander Kwasniewski, who will be featured again another time when we talk about drugs, by the way. But the Polish have got this. This instability born of their history. A lot of the Western commentary on Poland is really very illiterate. How many people writing this stuff know that Poland did not actually exist between the late 18th century and the 20th century? It was actually carved up between Germany, Austria, and Russia, and ceased to exist during the whole of the 19th century. I mean, that's not the kind of thing that Britain or even France or Germany with land borders can imagine ever happening, because polite Western Europeans don't do that. And in the case of Britain, it's impossible. The only time our borders are changed is in the question, the Irish question, of course. But Poland has got an existential threat. You can't be doing with the kind of liberal democratic norms which even Britain and America only evolved long after they had established basically that they wouldn't be invaded by anyone. So it's pretty hypocritical. But yeah, there are concerns about law and justice. It is unpopular. But if you travel around Poland, you will see why they were so concerned about buying up of land. There was a time, 10 years ago nearly now, where Poland was more like was developing in the way of Madagascar, of even intercontinental businesses, the likes of Monsanto and Korean companies, saying, well, that looks like an interesting county, we'll buy it up for agricultural development. And the Poles are not going to allow that to happen. They're not that stupid. A lot of their mortgages, of course, from Poland and right through to Bulgaria were denominated in hard currencies, such as Swiss francs and euros. And when the crisis hit in 2008, people who were still able to keep up their repayments in local currency terms were foreclosed because of the hard currency peg. So Poland is not going to repeat those mistakes again.
But I suppose we could mention the slight irony in this, because, of course, what is Foreign Policy magazine complaining about here? Polish moves to quickly neuter the Constitutional Court. Well, of course, we don't have a Constitutional Court here as such. We do have a constitution, which our government is doing its best to neuter at the moment. To take control of state media, well, there's going mad about control of the media again, because Leveson is starting to raise his ugly head, and the government seems to be a little bit reticent to push forward with Leveson too, much to the disgust of the various campaigners and so on. So, I mean, the criticism of the Polish government, there's a certain amount of that could be levelled at our own.
It certainly could, and there's nothing we don't accuse other countries of that we don't do ourselves. It's the usual, deflection maneuver. Is assume the worst of motives in the people that you're fiddling because you're fiddling them yourself, and you know what yourself is capable of as a government. And the other thing I think that article highlights is that the Visegrad Four, Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary, a tight knit group of mutual security and diplomacy in Central Europe, is under severe threat. One of the pieces that didn't make the cut for today, but I'm posting it in the chat box now, and you can find it easily enough, is Mr. Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister, looking very uncharacteristically sweaty and nervous and fiddling with his hands because he's giving a press conference after the last European Council meeting, the heads of government of EU member states, saying we're trying to protect Germany and the rest of Europe from a massive swamp of migration, and they're not interested. And even he won't say it, he won't break diplomatic protocol, but even the Czechs and Slovaks within his own Visegrad 4 group are going off reservation now and saying, well, actually, just submitting to Merkel's will might be the easiest and cheapest thing for us to do. So really, you've only got Poland and Hungary, these two ancient and proud nations in that part of the world, who are prepared to do anything. And if a wedge can be driven further between those two, I think game up for Central European sovereignty.
Okay, well, look, we mentioned Lithuania before the break, and we'll come on to that in a second. But this article from RT, headline is Lithuania confirms presence of U.S. special forces as a deterrent against Russian aggression. Vilnius, to say, has confirmed that an American special forces contingent is stationed in Lithuania to bolster the training of the Baltic states' own commandos and to serve as a deterrent against potential Russian aggression, in quotes. The United States was the first to offer additional safety assurance measures to the Baltic countries following the deterioration of the security situation in the region after the annexation of Crimea. I think we mentioned before the Christmas break, Alex, that the Baltic countries, Lithuania and Latvia and so on, there is a groundswell of popular opinion there, really anti-NATO and really asking what the hell is NATO up to. While I understand why RT has published this, what do you think is in the background here? What is what's the American agenda here? Is it just to poke a stick at the bear, or what are they training the Lithuanian troops for a particular purpose, do you think?
Lithuanians have never been particularly skilled infantrymen. Eastern Europe's a part of the world where some nations excel at that and others don't. They don't have the toughness of the Latvians and especially the Estonians, who are just like the Finns in their resolve. So I don't think that there's a plan to train up the Lithuanians to be proxies in that sense. But as we've discussed before, more generally, there is a plan for a buffer zone with expendable nations between Germany and Russia being used to keep Germany and Russia in check. I do think that there's a very gung-ho attitude among the kind of Green Berets and others who've been sent to Lithuania and the Suwałki area of Poland that borders it. They've been tweeting out shots of them, themselves firing RPGs and the like in the direction of the Russian border as a kind of Yabu sucks maneuver. Not a good move. But again, with the prevailing ignorance there is about the Baltic, I think it's worth stressing countries like Estonia behind me on the map there. You can see from the geography that they're between the Devil and the Deep Blue Sea, the Devil being Russia, as it were. And particularly in Estonia, if you go into a bookshop, as I've done, and say, good morning, I would like a list of the victims of the Russian aggression, please, they will say, here you are, and plonk these massive box file-sized books on the desk of all the people who were ever killed in the 1941 invasion. The Latvians have the same records as well. Lithuania lost slightly fewer, but still horrendous numbers. Something like a quarter of the population of those countries. And there is no way, there's just absolutely no way these countries want to go up against Russia in combat. It may be that Lithuania, which is the most deluded of the three because it had a kind of nationalistic past as a Catholic kingdom together with Poland, maybe a few people there have got this fantasy that the Anglo-Saxons will ride in on a white horse and defend their borders and push into Russia for them. But other than that, I don't think that people have got any desire at all to stoke that bear.
Surely the Ukrainian situation must, they must watch that and perhaps have a different view.
Yes, yeah. I mean, Ukraine's the problem there because you've got three nations in one. You've got Novorossiya, as it's now called, the East and South, which historically was not even part of Ukraine or Malorossiya, as it was called then. It was part of Russia proper. Then you've got the central bit, which is the sort of ordinary Ukrainians who speak Ukrainian and wish for some kind of independence. And in the far west, in the Carpathian Mountains, you've got these people who really have been taken over by neo-Nazi nutcases. The whole population, they mark the the movements of Stepan Bandera, as if that was the high point of their history, this Nazi collaborator. And there is, in that kind of hilly area south of Poland, there is a groundswell of people who really would just like to go nuts and hurl themselves at Russia, even if they all died. There's almost an explicit sense of, hell, let's start World War III, it will be fun. And you see that again in Aleppo with the very suspicious, supposedly 7-year-old girl Bana from Aleppo tweeting, whose father is a confirmed jihadi, by the way. One of her supposed tweets done in her name recently was, "It's better to start World War III than to see eastern Aleppo cleared out of ISIS." So you've got the same attitude again. We are fiddling the buffer zone countries and trying to control their destinies. They are cute enough to do the same to us as well, because they know we've got hotheads and mentally unbalanced people in power, and they like to press our buttons, like our humanitarian concern, and say, "Come on then, and start World War III for us."
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, speaking of World War III, Georgia in the past has been a potential front for that. What's the European Bank up to in Georgia at the moment then?
Oh, this one is the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the EBRD, which was set up as a kind of victors' banking club, as a new international financial institution in 1991. And it's there for the Westerners to plunk money in Eastern Europe for their own pet projects without even the rudimentary controls that you would have in the IMF and the World Bank. And this is the kind of stuff, thanks to a source who is sending a lot of this stuff to me now. I mean, I knew through the 90s and 2000s when I was in Georgia and reporting on Georgia, I knew that the EBRD was very active, but now they're basically setting up the Georgians as lab rats and guinea pigs, as far as I can see, and telling them, well, you're going to try out new cancer cures funded by the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development by loaning to this pharmaceutical company called Aversi that's come out of nowhere. I don't trust Georgian pharmaceutical standards. They've got great knowledge, but very, very low ethics. The Georgians actually had a world-beating idea for killing bacteria called bacteriophage, culturing large cells that would gobble up bacteria, which was unique in the world, that George Eliava Institute. That there's fantastic knowledge there, but as I say, it's a great place for people with a lot of money and no scruples to move in and say, we're going to try this out on your population, and if it works or if it's profitable, we'll expand it to Western Europe. They're into everything in that belt of countries between Germany and Russia. The EBRD are. They're loaning to supposed for sustainable forestry projects, new fueled projects, even cultural Marxist type projects, tinkering with gender identity. So there's a lot of questions to be asked about that.
And sort of to close this section off, I think Georgia and Ukraine come closer to the European family with visa-free EU travel. This is from Foreign Policy again. If we look at mention Poland again here, Alex, because obviously if the Polish border opens to Ukraine with visa-free EU travel, Poland, which has had its sort of migration of working age people to the West, is going to be flooded with Ukrainians looking for work.
Ukrainians are already there in large numbers, doing the same roles in Poland as the Poles do in the rest of Europe, plumbing and bus driving and the like. I tried to hire a bus driver in Poland once, and all the people I came up with were Ukrainians. It's quite crazy. The Poles were traditionally a diaspora nation anyway. It's another thing they have in common with the Irish. But they've got 40 million people, and 4.4 million of them, according to the latest stats, have gone abroad. Only Britain in the whole of Europe sends more people, and that's for retirement rather than for work. So they've hemorrhaged a huge number, and in security concerns as well. There's 45 million people in Ukraine, at least in terms of official citizenship, 5 million-ish in Georgia. So you've got 50 million people suddenly visa-free to come into Schengen land. And as we were discussing, there are hotbeds, parts of Georgia and particularly Western Ukraine, where CIA-inspired projects or neo-Nazi projects have got a lot of young men in their grasp, and they could easily be sent into Europe to do, to use the classic term, I know it's often misused, but they could really pull off a false flag. I mean, there are suspicions that white nationalists of some kind were involved in the Berlin Christmas market bombing before Christmas. This kind of thing could be a trend that we see, and a lot of these attacks, especially by the Ukrainians, if they're able to travel without questions asked through to Germany, France, Britain, they could actually pull off some of these jobs and then blame it on Islamic patsies.
So we're looking at a new Gladio.
I think absolutely it is, and it also it implies the total defeat of Georgian and Ukrainian sovereignty. I'll read you a bit of a friend's blog which he wrote, a very intellectual friend in Georgia when this news came out last month. He says Georgia has finally been promised visa-free travel to Europe. In itself, it's remarkable, but I would like to draw attention to the issue of what price Georgia has had to pay for being granted free movement for its citizens, because in today's world, nothing happens for free or just because. And then he describes how after the Saakashvili revolution, the Rose Revolution in 2003, the government briefly actually did want some sovereignty, not Saakashvili himself, but particularly the economy minister who came back from Russia because he saw a real chance, a guy called Kacha Bendukidze. He actually set up a model in which, as my friend says, he offered to turn Georgia into a proving ground for regional development using low tax rates, slashing bureaucracy, and tackling mafia crime. Now, remarkable will, he says, was needed to see this project through because its enemy was nothing other than the European Union. The EU could not stand to see this ideologically alien development of a free nation state in its own backyard, because by its very existence, it would represent to the countries of Eastern Europe and the Middle East that there was a possibility of an alternative to rule by Eurocrats. And he goes on to say that they voted or wanted revolutionaries in Georgia, but what they got was what quickly transpired to be wannabe Eurocrats who were, even outside the EU, making Georgia conform to all the EU's silly projects, much like the Norwegian civil service does. And this degenerated into socialism, he says. And as with all socialist officials, this crowd lost touch with the reality around them. So they were voted out, and real socialists who promised, soak the rich were voted in. So he says, in conclusion, matters have now reached the stage, therefore, where the EU has expressed its complete satisfaction with the level of democratization, in inverted commas, of Georgia. And therefore, they've offered the country a new mechanism to boost European influence abroad, a visa-free regime. This means that the Euro mentality is now supposed to penetrate the broader reaches of the Georgian population. And it's expected that thanks to this Georgian example, the way will be clear for the EU to achieve success in Euro democratization in other countries in the region. Obviously, such a policy by the EU does not amount to turning Georgia into an independent, integral entity that can develop freely without diktats from any other country. In exchange for surrendering their freedom to be masters of their own home, the Georgians are now being lobbed the opportunity to visit Europe without visa restrictions. And let's admit it, this is not the worst deal we could have got. The last time the peoples of this part of the world gave up their freedom, they got shootings, repression, and mass deportation to the gulags in return. It's clear enough that in this 21st century, hard power is no longer required to achieve an identical browbeating. Soft power is sufficient on its own nowadays.
That's a very interesting comment to end on, because, of course, soft power is exactly what the British government is talking about at every opportunity at the moment. The new hashtag, as we've mentioned before, is hashtag Global Britain, and soft power is what we're deploying. And, of course, 2017, the year of the Navy, that is the mechanism through which at least the government implies that soft power is going to be partly deployed. So this seems to be a change in strategy from the globalists, perhaps.
It's the iron fist in a velvet glove, or you can also call it go softly and carry a big stick, which I think was it's supposedly an African proverb, but it was popularized by the gang warfare types who pioneered counter-revolutionary strategy in Africa and Malaya, so Frank Kitzen's lot with his gangs and counter-gangs. So the idea is, let the natives know that you can beat them up if you want to, and that should be enough to persuade them to be cowed and do what you want anyway. And my friend in Georgia is writing that that's the position that the nation of Georgia and Ukraine have got to now. They've realized that if they don't obey, they will be whacked, just like Stalin whacked them. So they'd better roll over and surrender straight away.
Yeah. But in Moldova, they're taking the EU flag down.
Yes, of course, all the British papers reported the election of this new head of state in the European country, didn't they? Ho ho. Mr. Dodon, who was elected just before Christmas, Western Christmas that is, because Eastern European Christmas is still a few days away. And the first thing he did, always highly symbolic when this kind of thing happens, is he copied the Poles and the Hungarians, and I think even the Georgians now, and he said, blow this European Union flag. I'm not going to fly that from my office anymore. So there is a sign that one of these countries in the so-called European neighbourhood policy has lost any interest now in being an aspiring EU member state. At least they're not going to prostitute their whole national politics, as Georgia did for the last decade, just on the altar of this hope of getting to be an EU member state. Mr. Dodon has said, well, no, thank you very much. I'd rather hedge my bets and preserve national sovereignty and have as much to do with the Russians as I do with the West.
Okay, well, look, let's move on to Germany now. And This article here headlined Facebook Secret Rules of Deletion.
Yes, this is interesting that the Süddeutsche Zeitung has got hold of this, because this is highly classified stuff, I think, not in government terms, but in commercial terms. Süddeutsche Zeitung's international page in English has got hold of the rules for how the German language content on Facebook is deleted. And if you read it, you will see that it's not enough to say, I hate group X. You have to, tick a certain number of boxes and combine several criteria. But halfway through it, they say, by the way, Facebook's German censorship is outsourced. It is outsourced to a company in Berlin called Arvato, Arvato. And as Süddeutsche Zeitung tells us, that is a subsidiary of the Bertelsmann Media Corporation, which I think many viewers will know about, which has got a real stranglehold on German news and makes sure that it all pushes cultural Marxism. So there you are. Facebook isn't even policing, at least not in other languages. It's not policing its own stuff. It's handing it out to local mainstream media people to do.
And what's Spiegel saying about this?
Spiegel is reporting here that the leader in parliament of the socialists in Germany, Mr. Oppermann, was saying just before Christmas, Thomas Oppermann this is, that if Facebook does not promptly delete an offending message within 24 hours of being told to do so, then if it's been appropriately verified, he means if the establishment thinks it's fake news, Facebook must pay fines that hurt up to €500,000 a day. That's what Thomas Oppermann says. And he says, at the victim's demands, they will have to set the record straight and publish that with identical reach to the offending piece. So that is what at least the socialists in Germany are now wanting to happen to Facebook. So the price of news appears to be $500,000 a day.
Okay, $500,000 a day, that's fine. And you wanted to highlight this Guardian article, the neo-Nazi murder trial revealing Germany's darkest secrets.
All I would say about this is please read it in full, even though it's The Guardian, because as the article itself says, there's very little available in English about this. Some of us have been reading this in German for some time. The trend to admit that the BND and the BFV, Germany's agencies, which I've mentioned before, are being merged now, or effectively merged. They have a very different approach to Anglo-Saxon or French agencies, intelligence agencies. Their approach is to bribe using lots of taxpayers' money and to buy informers. But this has the effect of swelling the coffers of these groups, because the group's new friend, who's the informant, suddenly puts €500,000 or whatever on the table to show credentials. And this is all taxpayers' money. And the article in The Guardian puts that together with the fact that after the war, the US in particular, but all the allies, set up the German state and with it the intelligence agencies to be a tool, a plaything of the Western powers. And one of the ways they did that was that they used this Nazi who'd been very good at hunting Soviet spies called Richard Gehlen, Gehlen, to set up an organization to do that after the war in return for immunity for his gang of Nazis. And that is, there's a continuous line from that to the current German agencies. So it really is the first lifting of the lid in the English-speaking media of why the Germans have a very different and much less successful, perhaps deliberately less successful approach to tackling right-wing and left-wing extremism.
Okay, well, look, Alex, thank you very much. We're pretty much out of time. Just before we go, have you any sort of predictions or thoughts or forecasts, perhaps a better word, for the year? And how do you see things going in the next few months?
I think the patience of several European countries' populations has snapped. I would not say it is being tested. I think it has snapped now. The patience of the average Dutchman, for example, towards deliberate mass migration and some of the other loony policies that are being pushed from the EU and from their own capital, that patience has gone completely. So I wouldn't be surprised, not that I agree with his party, but I wouldn't be surprised if Geert Wilders gets a huge showing in the parliamentary elections we have here in the spring. And if you look right through to Austria, which is the edge of Western Europe culturally, all of those countries have got similar resentment. Outlets like ours, modest though they are actually telling the world what's happening, not least on the continent of Europe, and their own establishment media will not tell them. And our own mainstream media in Britain is too illiterate in foreign languages to bother looking and wouldn't want to report on it anyway. But I think 2017 is the year when you will see a lot of people actually flocking to our coverage. I'm not boasting that we're going to increase our viewership fold or anything, but I think that we're going to be taken even more seriously, and there will be many more outlets like this, hopefully across Europe as well. And I wouldn't say that all the elections this year are going to be shockers like the Brexit referendum and the election of Donald Trump. But I think we will see at least a couple of such elections, perhaps in smaller European countries with less media coverage. And I think by the end of this year, the European Union will be looking rather different.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much, Alex, as always. Tomorrow, I believe we've got Vanessa Beeley on with us. So we will be back at 1 o'clock as usual. Thanks again to Alex. Thanks to everybody who's watched. And we'll see you at 1 tomorrow. Bye-bye.